Tensions inside Russia are reaching a breaking point. Putin may be preparing to remove General Gerasimov, signaling a major shakeup within the military command. The Kremlin is growing uneasy as internal rivalries and mistrust deepen. Across Russian cities, youth-led protests are gaining momentum. People are openly challenging the dictatorship for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Ukraine's strikes continue to cripple Russia's economy. Oil refineries are exploding from within and drones keep hitting key energy targets. Fuel shortages, gas disruptions, and industrial collapse are becoming the new reality. The situation is spiraling, and even the Kremlin can no longer hide the truth. Let's talk about it. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Maria Farafonova, and here are the latest news. Tensions are growing within Russia's leadership. Reports indicate that Putin is losing trust in his top military commanders after a series of setbacks on the front line. General Gerasimov's position is increasingly uncertain, and a major shakeup in the military hierarchy may be imminent. According to partisan sources, the Kremlin is preparing for another round of internal purges.
The Kremlin is extremely dissatisfied with his performance and false reports from the front. Putin has given Gerasimov a deadline to take Pokrovsk by mid-November. This order is the general's last chance to retain his post.
According to the Attach resistance movement, candidates to replace Gerasimov are already being discussed within Putin's inner circle. The most likely successor is Colonel General Viktor Poznyhir, who is known for being more compliant and loyal to the Kremlin. Meanwhile, the youth uprising against Putin's dictatorship is gaining momentum by the day. In St. Petersburg, followers have emerged of Naoko, a well-known Russian singer who performed anti-war and anti-Putin songs and drew near rally-sized crowds in the streets.
The concert was interrupted by police. At least 3 musicians were detained and are being taken to the first police station.
Local authorities are growing uneasy as new reports spread quickly. The news is reaching Putin, pro-war channels are becoming anxious, and even state propagandists are starting to sound concerned.
It's astounding how afraid Russian authorities are of children and words.
It seems Putin is now gripped by fear and uncertainty. The Kremlin is under growing pressure, and the longtime ruler who once appeared untouchable now sees conspiracies everywhere. His allies are distancing themselves, generals are quietly discussing his possible removal, and members of the elite are preparing for change. Inside the Kremlin, tensions are rising. Putin has ordered new inspections and internal purges in an attempt to restore control, but many believe it may already be too late. Is this the beginning of the end of Russia's long-standing leader? More on this in our next report.
For almost a quarter of a century, Vladimir Putin has been building a system of personal power in Russia, a totalitarian state where any dissent is punished and fear is the glue that holds the regime together. But today, this monolith is beginning to crack. The Russian dictator is in a panic, afraid of losing his grip on Russia. As the Telegraph writes, the bunker dweller carefully protects his regime from any threats. Recently, the FSB accused Mikhail Khodorkovsky and 22 other members of the Russian anti-war committee of preparing a coup d'etat. According to the security service, the organization is allegedly planning a violent seizure of power and the overthrow of the constitutional order.
This tells us that the Kremlin is paranoid. Putin is searching for enemies in an attempt to strengthen his regime. John Herbst, Senior Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council and former US Ambassador to Ukraine.
After spending 10 years in a Siberian prison, Khodorkovsky was released in 2013 and fled to Europe, where in 2022 he founded the Anti-War Committee. In an interview with The Telegraph, he stated that the FSB's accusations are a reflection of the Kremlin's fear of the future and the issue of the transfer of power.
What do we have in Russia? A prime minister whom no one elected, but who was appointed by Putin. Courts appointed by Putin. A parliament whose seats were filled as a result of fraudulent elections and in whose legitimacy no one believes. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Russian entrepreneur and publicist.
They couldn't care less about the liberals who fled after being neutered. They're not afraid, not in the slightest. They're afraid of each other. Of the same kind of predators. Those who circle around you, smile in your face every day, and swear loyalty. Those are the ones who can do something. And Putin knows this perfectly well. And Prigozhin's mutiny, even if it was staged, clearly showed that no one is going to defend him. Neither the National Guard, nor the police, nor the rank and file, nor the generals. No one cares, no one gives a damn. And that's why Putin is afraid.
And indeed, fear becomes the key word. The dictator is cornered, and the economic situation only heightens the anxiety. Russia's Minister of Economy, Maxim Reshetnikov, has admitted the country is on the verge of a recession. The banking system is suffocating under the debts of defense enterprises. According to Harvard analyst Craig Kennedy, $190 billion in loans have been issued to defense industry companies without guarantees. And now this bubble could burst at any moment. Moreover, Ukrainian drones have destroyed more than half of Russia's oil refineries, forcing the country into huge lines at gas stations and causing a fuel shortage. And new sanctions from across the ocean have only intensified the blow. Donald Trump imposed the most painful restrictions since the beginning of the war. The giants Rosneft and Lukoil have come under attack. Now China and India are reducing their purchases of Russian oil. Almost 3 million barrels per day are at risk, and along with them, half of the Kremlin's revenues. But Putin fears not only internal threats, but external ones as well. The dictator is pulling more and more air defense systems toward the Kremlin. There are already 5 layers of defense around the capital. Panzer, S-300 and SE-400 systems are being brought in from all regions.
It's now official. Ukrainian defense forces strikes on oil refineries deep inside Russia have dealt a major blow to the aggressor's economy. As a result of these attacks, Russia has lost more than 20% of its refining capacity and up to 27% of its fuel production. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced the achievement as a triumph.
We believe the Russians have lost over 20% of their oil refining capacity, around 22 to 27% of their fuel production. That's why there have been queues. There is a real problem there.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A turning point has begun. Russian oil refineries are increasingly facing internal failures and accidents even before Ukrainian drone strikes reach them.
Бабах. Вон какой дым пошел. Попали. Ту-ду-ду, пошел. Еще.
This can no longer be hidden. Even Russian economists are beginning to speak out. Analyst Vyacheslav Shiraev made a sharp statement about the future of Russia's oil industry, which is already in serious decline.
This is an abnormal regime for oil refining. At some point, it will start to make itself felt simply through breakdowns, explosions of some kind, which will have no relation to Ukrainian drones.
Russia's refineries are running at full capacity, with no repairs, no reconstructions, and no downtime. Everything operates around the clock to create the illusion that the situation remains under control. Despite the Kremlin's efforts to hide it, sanctions are taking a toll on Russia's ambitions. The company Yatek has officially shelved its large-scale Yakutsk LNG project. The plans were bold, up to 18 million tons of liquefied gas per year, but the ambitious idea never moved beyond paper.
Because when sanctions don't work, there is simply no equipment, no shipyards, no partners, and nothing to export. So while the world is switching to hydrogen and renewable energy, Russia is heroically returning to the cave with a gas torch and a server for mining.
It seems that even Russia's gas industry is losing its strength. The country's economy is struggling, factories are shutting down, production is slowing, and industrial output continues to fall. Despite Putin's insistence that everything is under control, the reality looks very different. Years of war and sanctions have drained the Kremlin's resources, leaving little room for growth or recovery. Can Russia's economy ever bounce back? Or is the decline now irreversible? More on this in our next report.
Resources are on the verge of exhaustion. Claims about the stability of the Russian economy do not stand up to the facts.
Honestly, there's really no other way to put it. Well, this truly isn't our choice, and we certainly do not want things to develop or progress in this particular way.
Putin is trying to bluff and save face by creating an illusion of success, but it's all in vain. The Russian economy is rapidly going downhill. Almost 80% of the country's industry has fallen into a state of recession.
When we talk about individual sectors, it means that production in these sectors, compared to the same period, usually the previous year, has gotten worse. In other words, things aren't improving, they're getting worse. And recession is exactly this kind of deterioration, when you're in the red, and when a recession becomes prolonged, when it's not just 1 year, but the say, 3 or 4 years of decline, then it's no longer a recession, it's a depression.
Finally, since September, the overall growth of industrial production in Russia has slowed to just 0.3% year-on-year. That's almost 19 times less than last year.
There simply aren't enough people available to work in the necessary roles, and in addition to that, there is just not enough money or financial resources to pay for the delivery and transportation of essential components, or to actually purchase and acquire the goods and materials you need for the processing of your products. So, as a direct result of these combined challenges, you ultimately end up producing a smaller quantity, or less, than you otherwise would be able to under better circumstances. And when you produce less, there you have it, a recession, a negative compared to the previous period.
The decline is especially sharp in those civilian sectors that were supposed to replace the products of foreign companies that left Russia after the start of the full-scale war.
The collapse of import substitution. There were plans to replace everything, but to do that, you have to actually produce what you're going to use as a substitute. And if you're not producing what you need to substitute, then how are you supposed to carry out this import substitution when you're not making anything at all? In other words, any economic downturn inevitably means that goods are not being produced. And if they're not being produced, there's no point in keeping the people who make them. And that means unemployment. Unemployment is always an unpleasant situation.
As a result, the domestic market is deprived of consumer goods, and Russian factories are unable to make up for the shortage.
Even now, it would seem the military sector, part of the military sector, which is the production of weapons and ammunition, in September of this year compared to September of last year, in Russia, it's down by as much as, 1.3%. So even the production of weapons and ammunition is already in decline. What can we say about the rest of the economy, which is showing even worse results?
The central bank has predicted that Russia could face its worst economic downturn since the 1990s if sanctions are tightened. If the situation does not improve, by 2026 the Kremlin could lose $108 billion in export revenues.
Here, the problems are, let's say, just gaining momentum for now, but the first signs we see are that taxes in Russia have been rising since the beginning of the year. The sales tax will be introduced on December 1st, and the environmental tax is increasing almost tenfold starting November 1st, which is literally in just a week or even a couple of days. So it turns out that all these various economic problems are cropping up more and more often, and they keep appearing in the news because, it's like when you don't have a good option.
Russian Sberbank, following Gazprom, has begun mass layoffs. In the first quarter, the staff of the largest bank, which holds half of all individual deposits, decreased by 8.6 thousand employees, in the second quarter by 3.5 thousand, and in the third by 1.5 thousand.
And Sberbank of Russia, when they see that right now, just quoting the head of Sberbank, Herman Gref, throughout 2025, there is not a single new investment project that Sberbank is working on. So the people responsible for this area, well, they have nothing to do. And since they have nothing to do, there's no point in paying them a salary. They're being laid off. So laying people off is a demonstration that there is no demand for the economic functions that Sberbank provides. And accordingly, these people are being cut. But this is just one of many examples.
That's the reality. Only Putin is trying to hide all of this. But there's nowhere left to hide. The economy is cracking. The country is losing money.
Fuel shortages in Russia are becoming increasingly severe. Supplies are running low, prices continue to rise, and even state media is struggling to hide the crisis. The country that once prided itself on being an energy superpower is now facing a growing fuel deficit. As production slows and refinery damage mounts, ordinary citizens are feeling the impact at the pump. The Kremlin insists that it can stabilize the situation, but experts say the problem runs much deeper. Can Moscow regain control of its energy market, or is the system already collapsing from within? Find out in our next report.
An absolute anti-record for Putin. Cars in Russia are ceasing to be a means of transportation and are turning into a luxury item. After all, it is becoming increasingly difficult for Russian citizens to fuel their iron steeds. Despite the Kremlin extracting an enormous amount of oil, the country is facing a shortage of gasoline and diesel fuel.
As ridiculous as it sounds, in a country that used to be a gas station with pipeline appendages to China, economy, pipelines, and now it can't even provide its own population and businesses with that very oil and petroleum products.
The main culprit behind the catastrophic fuel shortage beyond the curb has been the Ukrainian armed forces and their precision strikes on the occupiers' oil refining infrastructure. By the end of September, oil refineries across Russia had at least 38% of their primary oil processing capacity standing idle. That's 338,000 tons per day. For the former gas station country, this is a colossal market collapse. Recently, the fuel shortage has become acutely felt even at the front lines. At regular Russian gas stations, you can hardly find 95-octane fuel in most regions, even if you search high and low. In
particular, some individual gas stations have started temporarily limiting the amount of fuel sold to each customer. That is, in some places they started allowing sales of up to 20 liters, in others up to 30 liters. And at other gas stations in certain regions of Russia, they even temporarily suspended the sale of certain types of fuel altogether. So in some places there was no 92-octane gasoline available, in others there was no 95-octane, and so on. At the same time, at small, independent private gas stations that are not part of the so-called vertically integrated oil companies, there was a sharp increase in fuel prices.
This only made the situation in the country worse. Along with the shortage at gas stations came sky-high prices. Over this summer, the price of gasoline and diesel in Russia has increased by a solid 15 to 20%, and starting from autumn, the prices displayed on gas station signs across the border have been changing almost daily, each time adding another ruble or two to the cost of fuel. But even such growth is not enough to cover the costs of Russian oil refineries, which are now constantly under drone attacks in the south.
The scale of the shortage is such that this is a desperate attempt hitting the pockets of oil workers who are already struggling. Oil companies whose profits are collapsing, many have become unprofitable, are trying at least somehow to supply the domestic market.
Things are even worse for Russian oil traders on foreign markets than they are domestically. If previously the state compensated for the price difference through exports, today Russian oil is not being bought in Europe, not even for pennies, which means that cheap gasoline within Russia itself is no longer something to expect.
There are major problems with fuel and the crisis will only get worse. Accordingly, oil companies can't make money on foreign markets because of sanctions, a strong ruble, and falling oil prices. Right now, Russian oil is trading at $55 to $57 per barrel there, taking into account all the discounts and markdowns in RMUT. And that's it. It turns out that now oil companies are left empty-handed. They are asking the government for help, lower taxes, reduced met rates, export duties, and excise taxes. But the authorities are unable to do this. Their budget is collapsing. They have a hole in the budget.
There is nothing in the Russian economy to patch this hole with. As a result, the Kremlin couldn't come up with anything better than to announce the start of fuel imports into the country and at the same time to halt all exports of gasoline and diesel from Russia.
So what they're planning is to import gasoline. So Putin has won. He used to say that Russia would not be a gas station, not a gas station country. I think this is a victory. We really need to mark the occasion. Now Russia will be buying gasoline. How can you not recall Churchill, who said that when the Soviet Union starts buying wheat, that's when it will come to an end? So roughly speaking, when Putin's Russia starts buying gasoline, after a while, it too will come to an end, just like the Soviet Union once did.
The Ukrainian authorities have also actively taken up the task of helping Russia come to an end. Alongside drone attacks on oil refineries, Kyiv is also hitting Putin's economy hard on the diplomatic front.
If Ukraine synchronizes its strategy to reduce Russia's resource base together with its allies, with Europe, with America, with Japan, and so on, then sanctions will be imposed very quickly. And even South Korea and Singapore will simply be afraid to supply gasoline to Russia so as not to fall under sanctions.
In such a hopeless situation, the Kremlin is grasping at its last straw. Disregarding all environmental standards, the government has practically legalized counterfeit fuel in the hope that at least it will saturate the Russian gasoline market. However, analysts insist that this decision will actually drive the final nail into the coffin of oil refining in Russia. And not only that,
the authorities have decided to fight the gasoline shortage with methods that cause suffocation and damage car engines. Deputy Prime Minister Novak has proposed bringing back for 6 months a special gasoline additive that was banned back in 2016. They want to use it to increase gasoline production, but there's a catch. This additive has a negative impact on the environment, damages cars, and increases the amount of nitrogen oxides in exhaust fumes, which settle in the air at a height of 60 centimeters above the ground. It is dangerous for people to inhale these vapors. Symptoms of poisoning include slowed reactions, suffocation, and a bluish tint to the hands and ears. And
such a surrogate with toxic additives will instantly turn the engine into a pile of scrap metal. After just 6 months of using such fuel, a car will become unusable, just like all of Russia's public transport. Then, without proper gasoline and diesel, the entire multi-million population of the country will be forced to switch modes of transport to good old horse-drawn carts.
What do you think about the latest events? Share your opinion in the comments, like the video, and stay informed about the main headlines. More to come.